The sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic flooded my senses. It was the signature smell of a hospital, one I had become intimately familiar with over my 15-year career in medicine. But this time, it was tainted with the metallic tang of blood and a chilling sense of death. My body felt as light as a dry leaf breaking from a branch, tumbling into a deep, bottomless abyss. Before the darkness consumed me completely, I vaguely heard the clatter of a falling medical tray and the piercing scream of the charge nurse. It all sounded distant, echoing as if from another world. I wanted to open my eyes, to tell them I could still hear, but my eyelids were as heavy as lead, and my throat was choked, unable to form a single word. Drifting in and out of consciousness on the precipice of life and death, my hearing became uncannily sharp, the last thread tethering me to this world. I heard the frantic rhythm of footsteps, the rattling wheels of a gurney on the cold linoleum floor, and then the panicked voice of Marcus, my closest colleague and the best neurosurgeon in the department, right beside my ear. Her pressure's dropping fast, pupils are blown. Prep or1, now, get a hold of Dr. Reed's family, move. I lay there, motionless on the narrow gurney, feeling life slip away from my body, bit by bit. My chest ached, each heartbeat a weak, desperate flutter. An hour passed, or perhaps an eternity, as my soul waited. Then, I heard a familiar sound, the confident, rhythmic click of expensive leather shoes on the polished floor. It was a sound so composed, so unhurried, it sent a shiver down my spine. Richard, my husband, had arrived, but instead of the frantic, choked cries I expected from a husband learning his wife was in critical condition, I heard a voice so calm it was terrifying. He spoke as if discussing a business contract, not the life of the woman he had married. What's her condition? Is she going to make it? Or will she be in a vegetative state? Marcus seemed stunned by his attitude. I could hear him take a deep, ragged breath to control his anger, his voice trembling. Rich, Evelyn has a massive cerebral hemorrhage. We need to perform a craniotomy immediately to relieve the pressure. The success rate is 70%. We can absolutely save her. You need to sign the surgical consent form. Now, there's no more time. A dreadful silence fell. I tried to focus all my remaining energy on listening, praying he would grab the pen and sign, but instead I heard the slow, deliberate rustle of paperwork. The scent of his expensive cologne, the one he wore for client dinners, wafted over, overpowering the smell of alcohol and blood. How alien and cruel that scent felt now. Dr. Cole. Richard's voice was slow and cold. Evelyn once told me that the worst fate for a doctor is to be alive but not truly living. She would never want to be a burden on her husband and child. I'm honoring my wife's wishes. His words were a razor-sharp blade stabbing directly into my fading heart. I wanted to scream, to sit up and grab him by his collar and yell that I had never said such a thing, that I wanted to live. I wanted to see my daughter grow up. But I could do nothing. Only lie there like a block of wood, enduring the most brutal betrayal from the man I had trusted with my entire life. "What are you talking about?" Marcus roared, his voice cracking with disbelief and rage. "There's a 70% chance of survival right in front of you. Are you even human? That's your wife, the mother of your child." "Enough," Richard cut him off, his voice now as sharp and cold as steel. "I am her husband. I am her sole legal guardian right now. I've made the decision. No surgery. Let her go peacefully." The scratching of a pen on paper echoed in the silence, each stroke carving my epitaph. He had signed, not to save me, but to sign my death warrant, stealing my last chance at survival. The consent form was crumpled and tossed onto the table with a thud. His footsteps turned and walked away, cold and decisive, leaving his dying wife and the stunned gazes of her colleagues behind. A thick, cold darkness enveloped me, a loneliness that seeped into my very bones. In the suffocating cocoon of my coma, memory was the only thing that remained vibrant. It replayed before me like a slow-motion film in shades of gray and sorrow. I remembered the fateful evening before, the real reason I had collapsed in the hospital lobby. It wasn't overwork, as everyone assumed. The image of Richard, his face flushed with alcohol, his eyes bloodshot and furious, was crystal clear. That night, He had thrown a stack of real estate documents on the table, demanding I sign away the family home my parents had left me. It was my only inheritance, a sacred place I had sworn to protect at all costs. When I steadfastly refused, telling him the house was for our daughter's future, Richard's polished, intellectual facade shattered. He grabbed my hair, yanked my head back, and slammed it against the hard edge of the solid oak desk. The impact was so forceful I heard a sickening crack inside my skull. Stars exploded in my vision, and a wave of nausea washed over me. "You're a doctor," he snarled, his breath thick with the stench of whiskey. "You know exactly where to hit someone so they die without leaving a mark, don't you? Sign it, now." I gritted my teeth, staggered to my feet, and somehow managed to drag myself to work the next morning. A major surgery was scheduled. I thought it was just a dizzy spell. Like so many other times he'd been violent, I never imagined it would be the fatal blow. Outside the ICU, I dimly heard the hushed whispers of Marcus and Sarah, the head nurse and my dearest friend. Sarah's voice trembled, choked with tears. "Mark, look at Evelyn's old medical charts. Oh my God, how could this be?" The rustling of papers was followed by Marcus's shocked gasp. A fractured 6th rib 5 months ago, a hairline fracture in her left wrist 3 months ago, soft tissue trauma to the occipital region, all self-diagnosed and self-treated. The reasons in the charts are all: fell off a bike, slipped on the stairs. Lying there, I listened to their words as tears flowed inward, stinging my heart with shame and anguish. For years, behind the happy family photos and lavish vacations Richard flaunted on social media, I had endured a living hell. I was a department head, a respected surgeon who saved lives. Yet at home, I was a silent victim of domestic violence. I feared the gossip, the pitying looks from others. And most foolishly, I still believed my silence would preserve a whole family for my daughter. "She hid it all from us," Sarah sobbed, her cries tearing at my heart. The other day, I saw her limping and asked what happened. She said it was just a leg cramp. It turns out that monster beat her. He brutalizes his wife, yet in public, he plays the part of the perfect, moral husband. While I lay there, fighting for every breath, and my colleagues grieved for me, where was Richard? The ringing of Marcus's phone shattered the somber atmosphere. He put it on speaker, probably hoping to persuade Richard one last time. But all that came through was the loud clinking of glasses and the roar of a dinner party. "Hello, Dr. Cole. I already told you, I'm busy with clients. Stop calling." Richard's slurred voice boomed, punctuated by the raucous laughter of his friends. "Life and death are up to fate. If she goes, it's because her time was up. What can I do? Anyway, I'm in the middle of a card game. Talk later." The dial tone droned on, coldly severing all hope. He was celebrating. He was raising a glass to my suffering, to my impending death. His cruelty was no longer the carelessness of a domineering man. It was the bloodlust of a beast in human clothing. My chest felt like it would explode with rage. No, I couldn't die like this. I couldn't let that monster toast to his victory over my grave. A fire of pure hatred ignited in the dying embers of my life, urging me on. I had to wake up. I had to open my eyes and demand justice for myself. The darkness held me for 3 long days, a period where my soul seemed lost in a cold, endless void. In my delirium, I heard the steady rhythm of the ventilator, like the metronome of death, and the hurried footsteps of my colleagues fighting day and night to bring me back. But clearest of all was the voice of Richard, the husband I once loved with all my heart, echoing from the other side of life's thin veil. It was a voice devoid of worry or compassion, filled only with cold, bone-chilling calculation. On the 3rd day, I felt a jolt like an electric current run down my spine. My heart seized in agonizing spasms, threatening to burst from my chest. The vital signs on the monitor began to plummet. Alarms blared, tearing through the quiet of the ICU. Marcus and his team rushed in like a whirlwind. Ignoring the refusal of treatment form Richard had signed, they administered a high dose of cardiac drugs and prepared the defibrillator to pull me back. "Charging to 200, clear!" Marcus's powerful voice commanded, followed by the violent jolt as my chest convulsed. The pain was so intense I wanted to surrender, to sink into an eternal sleep. But then, Richard's voice rang out from just outside the room, sharp and indignant. "What the hell do you think you're doing? I told you to pull the plug. Who's going to take care of her if she's a vegetable? Do you have any idea how much these last 3 days of hospital bills have cost?" His words were like a bucket of ice water thrown on my flickering soul, fanning the flames of hatred into a raging inferno. He didn't want to save me. He was afraid of the expense, afraid of being saddled with a disabled wife. Or, more accurately, he was afraid I would wake up and expose his crime. That fury became the most potent revival drug. I summoned every ounce of strength I had left and forced my heavy eyelids open. The glaring fluorescent light blinded me and everything was a blur. But then, Richard's image slowly came into focus. He was standing there, pointing a finger at the doctors, his face red with anger. The moment he turned and our eyes met, I saw sheer terror flash across his face. He recoiled, his face draining of all color, his mouth agape as he stammered incoherently. I wanted to sit up, to lunge at him and tear apart his hypocritical mask, but my body was paralyzed and my throat was raw from the intubation tube. Marcus saw my open eyes, his relief so profound he nearly wept. "Evelyn, you're awake. Thank God you're awake." He quickly checked my vitals and signaled for the nurse to remove the breathing tube. A searing pain shot through me as the plastic tube was pulled out. I coughed violently, each spasm feeling like it would tear my lungs apart. Sarah rushed to support me, her warm tears falling onto my hand. I took a deep, shuddering breath, gathering what little strength I had to say the most important thing, the words that had been seared into my mind even as I touched the door of death. Marcus leaned his ear close, and the entire room held its breath. I stared directly at Richard, my gaze no longer that of the submissive wife I had been for years, but that of a judge sentencing a condemned man. I whispered, my voice hoarse, breaking each word apart. Phone, locker, the anniversary. Those 3 words, though faint, had the force of a bomb. In the silent room, Richard froze, rooted to the spot, his eyes wide with horror as if he were seeing a ghost. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He started to lunge forward, his hand reaching out as if to silence me, but Marcus was faster. He stepped in front of the bed, his gaze firm, and motioned for Sarah to go. "Sarah, go now. Call security and the police. No one leaves this room." Receiving the command, Sarah grabbed a set of spare keys and shot out of the ICU like an arrow. The sound of her footsteps pounding down the empty hospital corridor was urgent and frantic, reflecting the extreme anxiety in her heart. Lying in bed, though I couldn't see it, I could picture my best friend's every move. For years, Sarah was the only one who vaguely sensed something was wrong in my life. But I was the one who always found ways to hide it, brushing off her concern with forced smiles. Sarah ran straight to the on-call room in the surgical wing, the place I often told my husband I had to work overnight shifts to escape his senseless beatings. A small photo was taped to my personal locker, a picture of me smiling brightly on my graduation day. That smile now seemed so bitter and distant. Sarah's trembling hand inserted the key. The metallic click echoed in the quiet room. The locker door swung open. What she saw inside wasn't just a spare white coat or a few medical textbooks like in other lockers. Within that small space was the secret life I had tried so hard to conceal. Neatly folded clothes were stacked in a corner, a worn-out toothbrush, a half-used tube of toothpaste, a frayed towel, and a thin blanket rolled up in the corner. Sarah later told me that in that moment, she broke down and sobbed. She realized that the powerful, elegant department head everyone admired was, in reality, homeless within her own workplace. I had made the hospital my home, my only safe haven from my abusive husband. Those old items were testaments to the long nights I spent huddled in the on-call room, too afraid to go home, fearing Richard's drunken rages, the fiery slaps, or the dull thuds of his fists against my ribs. Sarah reached into the deepest corner of the locker, where I had carefully hidden it behind a thick stack of books. Her fingers touched a cold, hard object. It was an old, cheap phone, its screen cracked, lying dormant like a silent witness waiting for its day to speak. I had hidden it there for years, living in constant fear of it being discovered, but it was the last lifeline I had. Sarah picked up the phone, its weight feeling as heavy as her best friend's life. Not daring to delay another second, she quickly closed the locker, clutched the phone to her chest, and ran back to the ICU. Outside, a sudden summer storm broke, the rain lashing against the windows like a lament for my bitter fate. Back in the hospital room, the tension was suffocating. Richard was still cornered, blocked by 2 young male doctors and hospital security. He paced back and forth like a caged animal, his eyes darting around, searching for an escape route. Sweat poured down his forehead, though the air conditioning was on high. When the door flew open and Sarah entered with the phone, I saw the color completely drain from Richard's face. Sarah walked to my bedside, her hands still shaking as she presented the phone to Marcus and the 2 police officers who had just arrived. The old phone, its paint peeling, looked out of place amidst the modern medical equipment, but it radiated an immense weight. Cornered, Richard saw the phone and erupted like a cornered beast. "That's my wife's private property. You have no right to touch that. Give it back," he roared. A young, stern-faced police officer stepped in front of him. "Sir, you need to remain calm," he said, his voice firm. "This is a key piece of evidence, according to the victim's statement. Any further disruption will result in your arrest for disorderly conduct and obstruction of justice." Richard froze, grinding his teeth, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the phone as if he could incinerate it with his gaze. Marcus took the phone. The screen lit up, prompting for a password. He looked at me, his expression questioning, waiting. Lying on the bed, my breath was still shallow, but my mind was clearer than ever. "His mother's anniversary," I whispered, the words draining my last bit of strength. Marcus frowned and turned to Richard. "What is the date of your mother's death anniversary?" Richard fell silent, turning his face away, deliberately avoiding the question. Did he think that if he didn't speak, no one could unlock the phone? He was wrong. Sarah, standing beside him, pulled out her own phone and quickly scrolled through social media. "September 23rd, she announced, her voice choked with suppressed anger. "Every year on this day, Evelyn takes the day off. She buys so much food to prepare a memorial feast, but she always comes to work the next day with swollen eyes. I remember it clearly because last year she even had to be admitted for IV fluids the day after." Marcus nodded. His fingers quickly typed the numbers 0923 into the screen. The phone vibrated softly and unlocked. The home screen was a plain black background. No wallpaper, no entertainment apps, just a single folder in the middle of the screen with a short, haunting name, Evidence. Why was the password my mother-in-law's death anniversary? Perhaps no one but me could understand the pain behind that date. It was the day she had passed away from a long illness 6 years ago, and it was also the day that marked the beginning of the tragic saga of my life. Every year, on her anniversary, Richard would get blind drunk and drag me in front of her memorial altar to beat me senseless. He would hit me while cursing, blaming me for being a harbinger of bad luck, the reason his mother died young. He would force me to kneel all night without food or water, just to listen to his irrational tirades. One year, he even dumped a bowl of hot bamboo shoot soup on my head because he thought it wasn't seasoned perfectly. His mother's death anniversary, a day that should have been for remembrance and respect, had become the anniversary of the death of my own dignity. I chose that date as my password so that every time I opened the phone, the pain would remind me never to forget, never to forgive that monster. Marcus tapped on the evidence folder. Inside, it was organized with a heartbreakingly clinical precision. Audio, photos, injuries, prescriptions, videos. Each subfolder contained dozens of files, meticulously labeled with dates. Looking at the detailed organization, Marcus couldn't hold back his tears. He understood that to gather this evidence, I had paid a price in blood, tears, and absolute terror over years of living in hell. A police officer took a cable from his bag and connected my phone to a small Bluetooth speaker they had brought for taking on-site statements. The room fell into absolute silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard stood huddled in the corner, his head bowed, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He knew the moment of judgment had arrived. Marcus randomly selected a file from the audio folder. Static crackled first, then a sharp, piercing sound tore through the air. Smack! It was the sound of a forceful slap, so crisp that even listening to it made one's face sting. It was followed by Richard's slurred, contemptuous voice, reeking of alcohol. "You think you're so great just because you're a doctor? Look at yourself. You're skinny as a rail, and your face is always miserable. I did your family a favor by marrying you, you know that?" Then came my pleading voice, trembling and weak. "Please, Rich, you're drunk. Just go to bed. Don't hit me anymore. I have surgery tomorrow." "Surgery, my ass!" Richard roared, accompanied by the sound of crashing objects. "You make peanuts, but you're gone all day and night. I forbid it. Starting tomorrow, you're forbidden from working. You stay home and serve me. If you step 1 foot out that door, I'll break your legs." Everyone in the room shuddered. The young police officer clenched his fists, his eyes burning with fury as he looked at Richard. They couldn't believe that behind the handsome, respectable facade of a successful businessman was such a twisted, sick soul. Richard remained silent, but his shoulders began to tremble, and sweat soaked through his expensive shirt. Marcus switched to another recording, dated 3 months prior. This time, there were no sounds of physical violence, but the content was even more terrifying. "Sign it." "I told you to sign the loan papers," Richard hissed through gritted teeth. "I need $500,000 for a business deal. If you don't sign, I'll throw us all out on the street. And don't think you can hide those savings bonds your parents left you. I know all about them. That's the inheritance my parents left for Lily." "I can't," I sobbed. "Your money is my money. You're my wife. I have the right to your assets. If you don't hand it over, don't blame me for what happens next." A loud thud was heard, followed by my piercing scream, which was abruptly cut off. The recording ended with Richard's heavy panting and him muttering a curse. "Stupid bitch. A beating is the only way to teach you." Hearing this, Sarah could no longer contain herself. She covered her face and wept uncontrollably. Marcus's eyes were red as he looked at me with profound sorrow. For so long, I had always appeared strong and cheerful in front of my colleagues. No one knew that every time the front door closed, I had to face a demon disguised as my husband. His vile words and brutal beatings had eroded my body and soul, day by day. The lead police officer signaled to turn off the speaker. He walked up to Richard, his voice low and firm, stripped of any leniency. "Mr. Richard Thompson, with this preliminary evidence, we have sufficient grounds to arrest you for felony assault and domestic abuse. Please come with us to the precinct." The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around Richard's wrists, a final, decisive sound. He no longer struggled or denied anything. He was like a deflated balloon, limp and pathetic. As he was led past my bed, he lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine one last time. There was no rage in them, only fear and a flicker of disbelief. Perhaps even now, he couldn't believe that the meek wife he had always looked down upon could be the one to send him to prison with the very evidence he thought would remain forever buried in darkness. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then decided to open the injuries photo folder. His fingers seemed to weigh a ton as he swiped across the screen, as if turning the pages of a diary filled with blood and tears. The first photo that appeared, magnified on the screen, was of a massive, dark purple bruise covering my thigh, a stark contrast to my pale skin. In the corner of the photo, I had carefully added a caption with the date and reason. May 17. Came home 10 minutes late due to traffic. For being 10 minutes late, for not having his dinner warmed up the moment he walked in the door, I had received a series of brutal kicks to my thigh with his hard-soled dress shoes. He kicked me while screaming that I was a neglectful wife who cared more about wandering around than her family. The truth was, I had just finished a 4-hour emergency appendectomy. I remember having to limp for a week after that, lying to my colleagues that I had bumped into a surgical table. The second photo showed a close-up of my swollen face, a long gash near my left eye still oozing fresh blood. The caption read, October 10. The soup was a little too salty. Lying in the hospital bed, I closed my eyes, but the searing pain of that day's slap felt as fresh as ever. The hot soup had been thrown at me, the salty liquid burning in the open wound. He hadn't just hit me. He had forced me to lick the spilled soup off the floor like a dog, apologizing for not knowing how to please my husband. One by one, the photos scrolled past. Each image was a scar, a pain I had silently endured. There were photos of my bare back, covered in a crisscrossing web of angry red welts from a belt. There were photos of my hand, swollen and purple, after being slammed in a door. Richard stood there, his face shifting from red to pale, then to a deathly white. He stammered, his voice trembling as he tried to salvage his last shred of dignity. She bruises easily. It was just, we would sometimes have minor scuffles, playing around too rough. I never meant any harm. Playing around? Sarah shrieked, unable to restrain herself. She shoved the phone in his face. Open your damn eyes and look. Does anyone play around by beating their wife until she has fractured bones and a cracked skull? Look at this. Are you a man or a monster? Richard shrank back, turning his head away, unable to face the irrefutable evidence. He knew any excuse he made now would be pointless and pathetic. The wounds on my body did not lie. They were the most vivid witnesses to his crimes. I looked at him, an infinite bitterness welling up inside me. This man, whom I once thought was my safe harbor, turned out to be the one who had single-handedly pushed me into an abyss of pain and despair. In the room thick with the smell of antiseptic, the lead police officer let out a weary sigh. He looked at Richard with utter contempt, the kind of look reserved for a coward who could only assert his dominance by beating a defenseless woman. I knew that these photos were not just evidence to convict him in a court of law. They were a life sentence for his conscience, something that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Marcus took a deep breath, his finger pausing on an audio file in the recording folder. The file was marked with a star for importance and was time-stamped 11:38 p.m. on June 17th. It was the fateful night, just hours before I was brought to the hospital in a deep coma. If the previous photos were an indictment of physical violence, this recording was the irrefutable proof of Richard's murderous intent and boundless greed. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy as everyone held their breath. Marcus pressed play. The initial static was quickly replaced by Richard's booming shouts. His voice was slurred but menacing. Sign it. I told you to sign the papers to sell the house. Now, I've already taken a deposit from the buyer. Don't be so stubborn. Then came my voice, resolute but laced with fear. You're insane, Richard. That was my parents' home, the only place our daughter has to fall back on. You got yourself into gambling debt. You can get yourself out. You are not touching that house. I will never sign. You dare to lecture me? Richard roared, followed by a loud crash and the sound of shattering objects. This house is marital property. I'm your husband. I have the right to sell it. No, don't hit me. It hurts. Richard, I'm begging you. My desperate screams were audible on the tape. The sickening thuds of punches and kicks could be heard clearly, like a sledgehammer on a sandbag. But what was most horrifying were the words that came out of Richard's mouth next, so cold and cruel they made one's hair stand on end. You won't sign, huh? Fine. If you die, this house becomes mine anyway. I'm your sole heir. Our child is under my guardianship. I can sell it whenever I want. You're gonna kill me? My voice was a weak, pained whisper. Killing you would get my hands dirty, Richard scoffed, a maniacal laugh echoing through the recording. I just need to beat you half to death. Then I'll sign the papers to refuse medical treatment. You'll die from a fall, from an illness. What does that have to do with me? I'll save myself the trouble of supporting a leech, and I'll get to collect on the life insurance and the house. You dying is the best thing that could happen to this family. Following that statement was the sound of my head hitting a hard object with a sickening thud. Then, silence, broken only by Richard's ragged breathing and the sound of his footsteps walking away, leaving me unconscious on the cold floor. The recording ended, leaving a terrifying void. Richard was slumped against the wall, his limbs trembling uncontrollably, his face ashen. He knew those words were the final nail in his coffin. He hadn't just committed domestic assault. This was premeditated, attempted murder with the despicable motive of financial gain. Marcus's gaze was no longer just angry. It was filled with utter disgust. He couldn't believe the man before him could be so cold-blooded as to plot his own wife's death for profit. The police captain slowly took off his glasses. He looked at Richard, his deep voice ringing out like a judgment bell. Mr. Thompson, this recording says it all. You not only beat your wife, but you intended to take her life to seize her assets and insurance money. This is an unforgivable crime. Lying in bed, hot tears streamed down my face. Finally, the unvarnished truth about the man I had shared my life with was exposed. Physical wounds might heal with time, but the scars left on the soul by such betrayal and malice would likely never fade. The police captain signaled to his 2 junior officers, his face stern and authoritative. He formally announced Richard's immediate arrest. "Richard Thompson, you are under arrest for attempted murder and felony domestic assault. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." At the word arrest, Richard seemed to snap out of his stupor. The survival instinct of a coward kicked in. He struggled violently, screaming like a madman, trying to break free from the officer's grip. "Let me go! You have no right! This is a private family matter. I'm her husband. I have the right to discipline my wife. She's not pressing charges, so what right do you have to arrest me?" He turned to me, his eyes wide with a desperate, menacing plea. "Evelyn, say something. Tell them to let me go. I'm your husband, the father of our child. Do you want Lily to grow up with a father in prison? You're awake now, so it's over. We can go home and sort this out ourselves. Why do you have to involve the police?" I closed my eyes, a single tear tracing a path down my gaunt cheek. He hadn't changed. Even at the end, he used our child as a shield, using the idea of family to manipulate me. But this time was different. My heart had died the moment he signed that form to refuse treatment. I said nothing, simply turning my head to face the wall. My silence was the most powerful answer, a complete and final rejection of our toxic relationship. Click! The cold sound of handcuffs snapping shut cut through his meaningless protests. The gleaming metal locked his wrists, marking the end of his reign of terror in my life. He was dragged towards the door, his shoes scuffing against the floor with a grating sound. As he passed my bed, he craned his neck back, his eyes now filled not with love, but with pure, venomous hatred. "You'll regret this. If I ever get out, you're finished. You cruel bitch, you dare to send your own husband to jail?" His curses faded as the door swung shut, restoring a fragile peace to the room. But it was a quiet tainted with sorrow. I opened my eyes and stared at the blank white ceiling. I didn't feel the satisfaction or joy I had imagined. All I felt was a vast, hollow emptiness. It was a release that came with a heart-wrenching pain. Marcus walked over and gently tucked the thin blanket around me. His eyes were full of sympathy and solidarity. I lay there, my strength seeming to drain away with every step Richard took out of my life. The pain from my untreated injuries, both old and new, began to roar back to life, tormenting my already broken body. Marcus and Sarah stayed by my side, not daring to leave. Sarah slumped into a chair, her eyes red, still clutching my old phone, as if it were a precious treasure. She carefully connected it to her laptop, copying all the data to a USB drive and uploading it to a secure cloud server. "Evelyn, you get some rest. Mark and I will take care of everything now," Sarah said softly, her voice still trembling with emotion. I nodded weakly, my eyelids heavy. I wanted to sleep. A deep, dreamless sleep to escape this cruel reality. But my sharp hearing still picked up the muffled sounds from the hallway. Though the door was closed, it couldn't block out the whispers of curious onlookers. "Did you hear? Dr. Reed's husband was arrested by the police. They handcuffed him and took him away right here." "Wow, he always looked so charming. Who would have thought he was an abuser? You really can't judge a book by its cover." I heard the wife is pretty cunning herself, though. Spent years secretly gathering evidence to put him away. Women these days are scary. Those words were like needles pricking my ears. That's how people are. They love to gossip and pass judgment on others' pain without knowing the full story. I knew a storm of public opinion was about to break. A renowned female surgeon, abused by her husband, nearly left to die, and then sending him to prison with her own hands. It would be a juicy topic for coffee breaks, for prying eyes and pitying glances. I grabbed the sleeve of Marcus's white coat, my hand trembling. I wasn't afraid of physical pain, but I was terrified of public opinion. I was terrified my daughter would have to grow up amidst those whispers. Marcus seemed to understand my fear. He gently squeezed my hand, his gaze firm. "Don't listen to them. You did the right thing. You were incredibly brave. We will always be on your side." His words were a balm to my chaotic heart, helping it slowly return to a steady rhythm. He was right. I had done nothing wrong. I was just protecting my life and my daughter's future. I closed my eyes, letting the gentle darkness wash over me, telling myself I had to be strong. After a fitful, nightmare-filled sleep, I awoke to the faint morning light filtering through the blinds, casting a pale glow on the white bedsheets. The first feeling that washed over me wasn't physical pain from my numerous injuries, but a strange sense of lightness in my soul, as if a 1,000-pound weight had finally been lifted from my chest. Marcus and Sarah were still there, their faces weary from lack of sleep, but their eyes lit up with joy when they saw me stir. Sarah quickly helped me sit up, placing a soft pillow behind my back and handing me a glass of warm water. The soothing liquid flowed down my parched throat, awakening every dormant cell in my body, reminding me that I was still alive, and the fight for justice had only just begun. The door opened quietly, and the police captain entered with a female detective. They were in plain clothes, their demeanor gentle and professional, likely not wanting to add more stress to someone who had just returned from the brink of death. The captain pulled a chair to my bedside, taking out a notepad and a small audio recorder. His voice was low, but firm. "Dr. Reed, we know you're still very weak, but your testimony right now is crucial to completing the case file. Please, take your time and tell us everything that happened. Don't leave out any detail, no matter how small." I nodded, taking a deep breath to suppress the wave of emotion rising within me. I began to speak, my voice still weak and hoarse, but each word was clear and deliberate. I spoke of our early married life, of the perfect facade of an intellectual, loving husband that Richard had painstakingly built to deceive the world. I told them about the first slap, just 3 months after our wedding, when I accidentally broke a vase he liked. That slap was like a bucket of cold water to my face, shattering my dreams of a happy marriage. But out of pride and fear of worrying my parents, I had chosen to stay silent and forgive. "He didn't just hit me," I said, tears finally streaming down my gaunt cheeks. "He isolated me from the world. He controlled all our finances, holding my salary card and giving me only a small daily allowance for groceries. He forbade me from seeing my friends and even installed a GPS tracker on my phone to monitor my every move. Anytime I came home a few minutes late or a male colleague called to discuss a case, I knew I would face a brutal beating that night." The female detective wrote furiously, her brow furrowed in sorrow. I continued, describing the emotional abuse, the vile curses he hurled at me and my family whenever he was drunk. He had transformed me from a confident, vibrant doctor into a timid woman who lived in constant fear, tiptoeing around her own home. I told them about the times I wanted a divorce, but he threatened to kill my entire family, to release fabricated intimate photos, to harm our daughter. That fear was like an invisible noose around my neck, paralyzing me, keeping me from screaming for help. That night, my voice trembled as I relived the horror. He tried to force me to sign the papers to sell the house to pay off his debts. When I refused, he grabbed my hair and slammed my head against the desk. Before I passed out, he said I should just die to get out of his way, so he could collect the insurance money. The captain stopped writing and looked up at me, his eyes full of sympathy and resolve. "Dr. Reed, what you have been through is horrific, but I assure you, with your testimony and the evidence you've collected, we will ensure he pays the price for his actions. Your silence is over." I signed the written statement, my handwriting shaky but firm. The act of putting my pen to that paper felt like signing my own Declaration of Independence. I was no longer a silent victim. I was the accuser, the strongest living witness to the crimes of the man I once shared my life with. After the police left, the atmosphere in the room quieted, but a lingering tension remained. Sarah still held my phone, seemingly searching for something more within the chaotic data I had saved. Suddenly, she let out a small gasp. "Evelyn, there's one more video file in a hidden folder on the cloud. The creation date is the afternoon of June 17th, just a few hours before it happened." I froze, the memory of that grim afternoon rushing back. That day, after overhearing Richard on the phone with a loan shark who threatened to take care of me if he couldn't sell the house, I felt an imminent danger. A dark premonition told me I might not get another chance to speak the truth. So, during a quiet moment on my shift, I locked my office door, propped my phone on a bookshelf, and recorded a video will. "Play it, Sarah." I nodded. "That's the last statement I left, in case I never woke up." Sarah's hand trembled as she pressed play. My own image from that day appeared on the screen. My face was pale and gaunt, my eyes sunken with dark circles from sleepless nights, but my gaze held a strange resolve. In the video, I was wearing my white coat, sitting straight before the camera. My voice was slow and clear, as if reading an indictment. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed, neurosurgeon, social security number XXXXXXXX. If you are watching this video, it means something has happened to me. I am either dead or in a persistent vegetative state. I want to state for the record that I am not depressed, I have no intention of self-harm, and my health is perfectly normal. If I die under unusual circumstances, the sole perpetrator is my husband, Richard Thompson." In the video, I paused to swallow back tears before continuing, briefly summarizing the years of abuse, Richard's massive debts, and his plot to seize my assets. I clearly stated the phone's password and the location of other evidence. For the video's conclusion, I looked directly into the camera, as if seeing into the souls of those who would be left behind. "Please, help me get justice. Don't let my death be in vain. And if you can, please protect my daughter. Don't let her live with a father who is a monster. Silence is not golden. Silence is complicity." I was wrong to be silent for so long, but I hope this belated cry for help can salvage what's left of my dignity. The video ended, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Sarah covered her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Marcus turned away, discreetly wiping a tear from his cheek. He could never have imagined that the strong colleague he worked with every day had been forced to prepare for her own death in such a lonely, agonizing way. That video wasn't just evidence, it was the heart-wrenching plea of a woman pushed to the absolute edge. It was a last will and testament written with the ink of utter despair. I looked at my own reflection in the darkened phone screen, my heart twisting. When I recorded that video, I had been thinking of death, preparing to leave this world. But now, having passed through that door and returned, I cherished life more than ever. That video would be the final nail in the coffin of Richard's freedom, shattering any defense he and his lawyers might concoct about an accident or a marital spat. The fragile peace in the room was short-lived. A commotion erupted in the hallway outside, shouting, footsteps, and the shrill, venomous voice of an older woman piercing through the soundproofed door. I stiffened, instantly recognizing the voice of Helen, Richard's mother. She hadn't come to see her daughter-in-law who had just escaped death. She had come to raise hell and defend her precious, incarcerated son. "Let me go! Get out of my way! Let me in there to deal with that damn viper! Does she have the nerve of a devil to call the cops on her own husband? That shameless, cheating whore!" The door rattled under her furious pounding. Marcus quickly signaled for security to block the entrance, but Helen's voice still sliced through the cracks, sharp as a knife. She put on a tragic performance for everyone in the hallway, wailing about the injustice of it all. "Oh, heavens above! My son is as gentle as a lamb. He loved his wife and child with all his heart, and she set a trap for him. Evelyn, you get out here and face me. You cheated on him, gave his money to your lover, and then framed him for abuse. Do you have a conscience? My family was cursed the day we let a woman like you in." Lying in bed, listening to her blatant lies and curses, I felt nothing but disgust. For years, she knew her son beat his wife, but she never once intervened. On the contrary, whenever she saw my bruised face, she would sneer, "You must have been disrespectful to make him teach you a lesson. A disobedient woman deserves a beating." Her blind indulgence was the poison that fed Richard's violent nature. Now that her son was arrested, she was playing the victim, using her loud mouth to twist the truth and turn me from the victim into the villain. She screamed that I was crazy, paranoid, that I self-harmed to frame my husband. Her venomous words made Sarah tremble with rage. She was about to open the door and confront her, but I shook my head, stopping her. I knew their family's nature. The more you argue, the more dramatic they become, playing to the crowd. The noise outside grew louder. It sounded like Helen had thrown herself on the floor, wailing and attracting the curiosity of patients and families from other rooms. "Everyone, come and see. My daughter-in-law, so educated but so wicked. She wants to steal his assets, so she sent him to prison. My son is innocent." I closed my eyes, a bitter smile on my lips. Like mother, like son. Richard's shamelessness and cruelty were inherited directly from her, but she was mistaken. This was a hospital, a place governed by rules and laws, not a chaotic market or her private home where she could do as she pleased. A few moments later, the heavy footsteps of security and local police arrived. Shouts to disperse the crowd were followed by Helen's shrieks of resistance, which gradually faded as she was forcibly removed from the area. The room returned to quiet, but the feeling of degradation lingered. I felt as if I had been stripped bare and publicly shamed. But at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. Helen's crude and clumsy performance had helped me sever the last remaining ties of affection or guilt. From this moment on, her family and I were on opposite sides of a war, no longer relatives, but sworn enemies. That evening, the police captain returned to my room, his expression far more somber than before. He carried a thick file, which he placed gently on the table before looking at me with grave seriousness. He told me that their expanded investigation had uncovered horrifying new details about Richard's motives, truths that even I, his wife of many years, had only vaguely suspected. "Evelyn, we've verified Richard Thompson's financial situation. It's much more serious than you thought. He wasn't just a few $100,000 in debt. The actual figure is over $2 million. I was stunned, my heart skipping a beat. $2 million. A staggering sum that I, a doctor on a hospital salary, could never have imagined. I knew Richard gambled, played poker, and bet on sports, but I thought it was minor, a few thousand here and there. It turned out he was a desperate addict, drowning in a swamp of loan sharks and online betting. He secretly took out a second mortgage on your house, supposedly for his business, but he gambled it all away online. The bank is now in the process of foreclosure," the captain continued, his voice steady, but each word felt like a hammer blow. On top of that, he borrowed over $500,000 from loan sharks at an exorbitant interest rate. They gave him an ultimatum. If he didn't pay them back this week, they would handle it their own way. I was horrified. I finally understood why he was so desperate for me to sell my parents' house that night. It wasn't just greed, it was the desperation of a man backed into a corner. He needed money, a lot of it, to plug the massive hole he had dug for himself. And when I refused to sell the last sacred memento of my parents, he resorted to the most wicked plan of all, killing me. We also found a life insurance policy in your name. The sole beneficiary is Richard Thompson. The payout for accidental death is $3 million. The captain flipped to a photocopy of the policy, pointing to my forged signature. He had planned it all very carefully. If you had died that night from an accidental fall, he would have sold your parents' house as your heir, collected the insurance money, and been free of his burdensome wife and child. In total, he stood to gain nearly $5 million, more than enough to pay off his debts and live comfortably. A chill ran down my spine. My life, our years of marriage, our precious daughter in his eyes, they were all just numbers in a cold calculation. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as an asset, a gold mine to be exploited one last time before being discarded. His cruelty wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a cold-blooded plan engineered by greed and a complete erosion of his humanity. I remembered his chillingly calm demeanor as he signed the form to refuse treatment, his words, "Let her go peacefully." Peacefully? He just wanted me to die quickly so he could cash in. He wanted to wash away his filthy gambling debts with my blood. I felt sick to my stomach, realizing I had shared my life with a monster in human skin. News of Richard's abuse and attempted murder spread like wildfire, faster than any virus I'd ever studied. Overnight, my family's story became a trending topic across social media. Sarah brought her phone to show me. She scrolled endlessly through posts, comments, and threads. The same lifestyle and home decorating groups where Richard had once posted pictures of our happy family and his gourmet meals to cultivate his image as the perfect husband had turned on him completely. They dug up old photos, old posts filled with his saccharine, fake sentiments, and tore them to shreds. The people who had once admired him, who had wished for a husband as thoughtful as him, now felt deceived and betrayed. They called him a coward, a hypocrite, a demon in disguise. The public outrage was a tidal wave, washing away the glossy veneer he had spent years painting. But as the person at the center of the storm, I understood that every storm leaves destruction in its wake, not just for the perpetrator, but for the victim as well. Alongside the messages of support and sympathy, I began to see malicious comments, sharp as daggers. Why was she so stupid? She let him beat her for years and didn't leave. She must have done something to provoke him. There's no smoke without fire. Another story about being abused to get attention? You can't trust anyone these days. Those callous words danced before my eyes, making my chest tighten, a feeling of bitter indignation rising in my throat. Sarah, furious, was about to type a response, but I gently placed my hand on hers and shook my head. It's no use, Sarah. You can't control what people say. They haven't lived my life. They don't understand the fear of being threatened, of being isolated. I put the phone down and looked out at the gray sky. I accepted those harsh words as a bitter medicine. They were partly right. I had been wrong for being too weak, wrong for my silence, which allowed evil to fester in my own home. I had blindly believed in the idea of preserving the family, and I had almost paid for it with my life. The social media storm, though brutal, was also a wake-up call. I realized that the superficial pride I had tried so hard to maintain was worthless. When the curtain was torn away, all that remained was the raw, painful truth. Strangers online could curse me or pity me today, but tomorrow they would forget and move on to the next drama. I was the only one who had to face and rebuild from the ashes of my life. Richard, in his jail cell, surely had no idea that his virtual fans were now his harshest critics. The reputation he valued more than his wife's life was now dragged through the mud. It was a fitting price to pay for his shallow, deceitful existence. 2 weeks later, I was cleared to move from the ICU to a regular hospital room. My health was improving, but the lingering effects of the assault and the severe hemorrhage were persistent. Walking was now an ordeal. Every time I put my foot down, a sharp pain shot up from my old rib and ankle injuries, sending a jolt to my brain that made me break out in a cold sweat. Marcus was always by my side, patiently helping me take slow, shuffling steps down the hospital corridor. He didn't say much, simply offering his strong arm as my support. Sometimes, the pain was too much. I wanted to give up, to collapse on the floor and cry my heart out. But looking into Marcus's determined eyes, seeing the devotion of Sarah and my other colleagues, I would grit my teeth and stand up again. I had to get better. I needed to be strong enough to stand in court, to look my enemy in the eye and demand justice. I contacted the most renowned law firm in the city to represent me. The day my attorney, Mr. Hayes, came to the hospital, I had gathered all the evidence, the old phone, the video will, the police reports on Richard's debts. I sat in a wheelchair, my face still pale, but my eyes no longer held the fear and avoidance of before. Mr. Hayes, I said, my voice clear and firm, I want to sue Richard Thompson for attempted murder and felony assault. I want him to receive the maximum possible sentence, with no leniency whatsoever. Mr. Hayes reviewed the file, nodding repeatedly, his expression one of respect and commitment. Dr. Reed, rest assured, with this ironclad evidence, compounded by the aggravating factors of his despicable motive and cruel methods, our victory is almost certain. I will do everything in my power to protect your rights. Holding the signed retainer agreement, I felt a new sense of strength. I was no longer the submissive wife hiding behind her husband. I was now the plaintiff, the one leading the charge against the fortress of evil Richard had built. I spent my free time reading law books, learning about legal procedures. I wanted to be not just a victim seeking justice, but an informed woman in control of her own destiny. At night in my hospital room, I no longer cried. I began to plan for a new life. I pictured a small apartment after my release, just for me and my daughter. I imagined quiet dinners, free from shouting and breaking dishes. That thought was a lighthouse, guiding me through the physical pain that tormented me each night. One rainy afternoon, Richard's attorney requested a meeting. He was a man in his 50s, impeccably dressed, with a shrewd, cunning look. He placed an expensive fruit basket on the table and offered a polished, corporate smile. "Dr. Reed, a pleasure. I'm here on behalf of my client, Mr. Thompson, to check on your health. He is deeply remorseful in jail and hopes for your speedy recovery." I smirked, not even glancing at the basket. "I doubt you're here just to deliver hollow pleasantries. Let's get straight to the point." The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Dr. Reed, a marriage is a complex thing. Even the closest couples have disagreements. Mr. Thompson knows he was wrong, and he wants to negotiate. If you agree to drop the charges, or at least request a lighter sentence, he will sign the divorce papers immediately and grant you full custody of your daughter. Furthermore, he will sign over a piece of property he owns upstate as compensation for your emotional distress." I looked at the man before me, disgusted by how they were trying to bargain with my pain and dignity. Richard hadn't changed. He still thought everything in the world could be solved with money and compromise. He thought I was still that foolish woman, desperate for the facade of a complete family or greedy for a small plot of land. He was using custody of my daughter, the most precious thing in my life, as a hostage to force me to let him go. "Go back and tell your client," I said slowly, each word as sharp as a scalpel, "that I don't need his charity. The court will decide custody based on character and financial stability. A convicted felon, a would-be murderer drowning in debt, what right does he have to fight me for our child?" I took the settlement agreement he had pushed towards me and tore it to pieces right in front of him. The sound of ripping paper was stark in the quiet room, like the sound of me tearing away the last shred of our marital bond. His money is dirty, and I don't want it. As for his freedom, let the law decide. I would rather my daughter have a father in prison for his crimes than live with a hypocrite walking free. Now, please leave. We will see each other in court." The lawyer was stunned. He hadn't expected the frail woman in the hospital bed to be so resolute. He quietly packed his briefcase, gave a curt nod, and left in a hurry, leaving behind nothing but my contempt. After the tense battle with Richard's lawyer, I had to face an even greater challenge: my own precious daughter. My mother brought Lily to visit me at the hospital. The moment she saw me in the bed, tangled in wires and IV lines, she burst into tears and ran to hug me. Her small, soft hands gently touched the bruises on my arms, her big, round eyes filled with fear and sorrow. "Mommy, does it hurt? Why have you been sick for so long? Where's Daddy? Grandma said he's on a business trip. When is he coming home?" Her innocent questions were like salt in my still bleeding wounds. I held her tight, breathing in the sweet, milky scent of her hair, fighting back my own tears. I had asked myself 1,000 times if I should lie to protect her image of her father. Would the brutal truth tarnish her innocent soul? But then I remembered the nights she would jolt awake at the sound of his shouting, the fearful look in her eyes whenever he was drunk. Though she was young, she was sensitive. She had sensed the turmoil in our home for a long time. If I continued to lie, I would be trapping her in the same cycle of falsehoods I had just fought so hard to escape. I gently pulled away, looked directly into her eyes, and wiped the tears from her chubby cheeks. "Lily, honey, listen to Mommy. Daddy isn't on a business trip. Daddy did something very wrong. He hurt Mommy very badly. And when grown-ups do something wrong, they have to be punished. They have to go to a place to learn how to be a better person." She looked at me, confused, her little lips pressed together. "Did Daddy hit you? I see him yell at you a lot. I don't like it when he hurts you." Her words broke my heart. She knew. She had been watching and remembering all the pain I had tried to hide. I thought I was protecting her, but I was actually forcing her to endure the trauma in silence alongside me. "Yes, sweetie. Daddy hit Mommy, and that was a very bad thing to do. We're not going to live with Daddy anymore. It will just be you and me. Is that okay?" Lily nodded vigorously. She buried her face in my chest, her voice small but firm. "Yes, I only need you, Mommy. I'll be a good girl. I'll protect you so no one can hit you again." I held her, my tears a mixture of happiness and sorrow. My daughter's heartbreaking maturity was the greatest motivation I needed to never give up. I realized that the truth, no matter how painful, was better than a beautiful lie. I had broken the wall of silence between us, and from now on, we would build our lives together on a foundation of honesty and love. During the days in the hospital awaiting the trial, I no longer felt alone within the cold, white walls. My story was like a stone thrown into a still pond, creating ripples that awakened the consciences of those around me. They were the silent witnesses, the ones who had previously chosen to ignore my pain out of fear of getting involved, out of the mind-your-own-business mentality that was so deeply ingrained in our society. But now, they bravely stepped out of the shadows to stand with me. The first to visit was Dr. Adams, a colleague from my department with whom I rarely spoke. She entered my room with a fruit basket, her eyes red with remorse. She took my hand, her voice choked with emotion. "Evelyn, I am so sorry. I was so oblivious. I saw you wearing sunglasses indoors, saw you secretly taking high-dose painkillers in the on-call room. I suspected something, but I just brushed it aside. I thought all couples fought. I never imagined you were living through hell." Her belated apology brought a sting to my eyes. I didn't blame her, or anyone else. In this fast-paced world, people are too busy with their own lives, their own small joys and sorrows. Few have the courage to interfere in others' domestic affairs, especially when the abuser wears a polished facade like Richard. I smiled weakly and shook my head. "Don't blame yourself. It was my fault for hiding it so well, for being too weak." It wasn't just my colleagues. The police captain informed me of something that was both surprising and deeply moving. My neighbors from the upscale apartment building where we lived, people who would only offer a cool, polite nod in the elevator, had come forward in unison. The elderly security guard, who had seen me run down to the lobby in the middle of the night with swollen eyes on multiple occasions, voluntarily went to the police to give a statement. He spoke of the times Richard came home drunk, shouting down the hallway, and the loud crashing sounds coming from our apartment late at night. Most importantly, Mrs. Gable from the apartment next door provided the police with a video clip from her hallway security camera. It showed Richard grabbing me by the hair and dragging me from the elevator into our apartment on a rainy night 2 months ago. She sent a message to me through my lawyer. "I feel so guilty, Dr. Reed. I heard you scream that night. I wanted to intervene, but my husband stopped me. He said it was their business, and we shouldn't get involved. If only I had been more assertive. If only I had knocked on the door or called security, maybe you wouldn't have had to endure what came next." Their regret, though late, provided crucial pieces to complete the puzzle of Richard's crimes. Their testimonies proved that his violence wasn't a one-time outburst, but a systematic, ongoing pattern of abuse, committed openly, without regard for others. I lay in bed reading their witness statements, my heart aching. It turned out I had never been completely alone. Kindness and compassion exist in everyone. Sometimes they are just obscured by fear and indifference. When people dare to break the wall of silence, justice has a chance to prevail. Those silent witnesses weren't just helping me, they were saving their own consciences. I was silently grateful to them. Grateful that they had finally chosen to stand on the side of light, to protect a vulnerable woman instead of continuing to tolerate the evil next door. 3 months later, the wounds on my skin had scarred over, but the pain in my soul was still fresh. The day of judgment finally arrived. The trial of Richard Thompson for attempted murder and felony assault, with the aggravating factor of a despicable motive, was open to the public. The sky was a grim, overcast gray, as if ready to unleash a downpour to wash away the filth of the world. I refused to be brought in on a gurney. I insisted that Marcus and Sarah help me into a wheelchair. I wanted to sit up straight, to hold my head high as I faced the man who had trampled on my life. The wheelchair rolled through the imposing courthouse doors, its wheels making a dry, grating sound on the stone floor. A crowd of reporters and curious onlookers had already gathered. Camera flashes went off like lightning, and lenses pointed at me like the muzzles of guns. I didn't flinch or bow my head. I wore dark sunglasses to hide my still bruised eyes, my hands gripping the arms of the wheelchair for courage. As I was wheeled into the courtroom, the noisy room fell silent. All eyes were on the small, frail woman in oversized hospital pajamas. Then, on the opposite side, the defendant's door opened. 2 bailiffs escorted Richard in. My heart skipped a beat. My hands clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. Was this Richard? The suave, handsome man who always had perfectly styled hair and smelled of expensive cologne? He looked pathetic. His head was shaved, revealing a gaunt, sallow face. He wore a black and white striped prison jumpsuit, his once proud shoulders now slumped in defeat. He kept his head down, not daring to look around, his feet shuffling heavily towards the defendant's table. From the gallery I saw his mother, Helen, staring at me with eyes that shot daggers. If looks could kill, I would have died 1,000 times under her hateful gaze. She let out a mournful cry of, "My son!" before breaking into sobs, but she was quickly reprimanded by the judge. Her pain for her son was real, but it felt so selfish and cruel when weighed against the pain he had inflicted on others. The judge's gavel struck, its sharp crack echoing through the large room, signaling that the hour of judgment had come. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "This is not the place to be weak, Evelyn," I told myself. "This wheelchair isn't a symbol of disability. It's a throne of survival. I am here to collect the debt of blood and tears from the past 5 years." Richard stood before the court, mumbling answers to the preliminary questions. His voice was trembling and hoarse, a stark contrast to the booming, aggressive tone he used when he beat me. It turned out that stripped of his successful businessman persona, faced with the punishment of the law, he was just a pathetic coward. I looked at him with no fear, no lingering affection, only a profound sense of contempt. The trial heated up during the litigation phase. Richard's defense attorney was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a cynical half-smile. He was known for being a master of twisting facts, willing to use any tactic to get his clients acquitted. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and began his defense with a dramatic, venomous tone. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, glancing dismissively in my direction. "My client, Mr. Richard Thompson, admits to a physical altercation with his wife. However, we must examine the root causes that led to this unfortunate incident. As the saying goes, it takes 2 to tango. Why would a gentle, loving family man like Mr. Thompson lose control to such an extent?" I sat frozen in my wheelchair, my blood boiling. What was he doing? Was he trying to blame the victim? "From my investigation," the lawyer continued, his voice dropping to a sympathetic tone, "Dr. Reed is a workaholic who frequently neglected her family. She treated the hospital as her home and her patients as more important than her husband and child. Mr. Thompson tried to address this many times, but she refused to change, leading to long-term marital conflict. Furthermore, after the birth of their child, Dr. Reed showed signs of postpartum depression. She was emotionally unstable, often irritable, and would provoke her husband. His blatant lies were like poisoned daggers stabbing into my heart. I gripped the arms of my wheelchair, my knuckles turning white with rage. So this was their strategy: tarnish my character, paint me as a terrible wife and an irresponsible mother to justify Richard's violence. They wanted to turn a murderer into the victim of an unhappy marriage. On the night of the incident, the lawyer's voice rose. It was Dr. Reed who started shouting, who insulted Mr. Thompson's character, and who threatened to divorce him and take their child. In a moment of extreme emotional distress, my client lost his temper and accidentally pushed her. The head injury was the result of an unfortunate fall. Mr. Thompson had absolutely no intention of killing her. A murmur went through the courtroom. Some people shook their heads in disgust, while others looked at me with suspicion. The lawyer's cunning words were beginning to poison the minds of the spectators. I felt my chest constrict, tears of frustration welling in my eyes. I was beaten half to death, nearly denied the right to live, and now, in this solemn courtroom, I was being slandered, accused of being the cause of my own suffering. Richard stood at the defendant's table, his head bowed in a show of remorse, but I swore I saw the corner of his mouth twitch into a smirk. He thought money could buy justice, could hire silver-tongued liars to cover up his crimes. The verbal assault, right here in front of everyone, was more painful than any physical blow. I wanted to stand up, to scream that they were lying, but my body wouldn't let me. I could only bite my lip until it bled, swallowing the bitterness, waiting for the truth to have its turn. Just as Richard's lawyer finished with a triumphant look, believing he had successfully sown doubt in the courtroom, my attorney, Mr. Hayes, slowly rose. He didn't rush to verbally rebut the lies. Instead, he requested permission from the court to present the most crucial piece of evidence. A small USB drive was connected to the court system, linked to the large screen and powerful speakers in the center of the room. The courtroom fell silent again, all eyes fixed on the screen. The audio file began to play. The static faded, replaced by the raw, chilling sound from the past, shattering the false solemnity the defense had created. "You won't sign, huh? Fine. If you die, this house becomes mine anyway. I just need to beat you half to death. Then I'll sign the papers to refuse medical treatment. I'll get to collect on the life insurance." Richard's voice filled the room, crystal clear, cold, and monstrously cruel. It was not the voice of a husband in a momentary rage who accidentally pushed his wife. It was the voice of a demon who had meticulously planned to murder his wife for his own insatiable greed. Each word was a slap in the face to the defense attorney, wiping the smug smile from his lips and replacing it with confusion and panic. The courtroom erupted in gasps of horror. The spectators, even those who had been skeptical just moments before, were now stunned. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. The truth was more brutal and horrifying than any movie script. Following the audio, the photos of my injuries were displayed one by one. The back covered in welts, the swollen face, the bruised legs. These silent witnesses were more powerful than 1,000 eloquent lies. At the defendant's table, Richard's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his chair. He didn't dare look up at the screen, covering his head with his hands as if to hide from reality. He knew it was over. His charade, his lies, had crumbled before the undeniable light of truth. Helen, in the gallery, went pale, her mouth agape in shock. Her initial aggression had vanished, replaced by sheer terror. I sat in my wheelchair, watching the painful images of myself on the large screen, silent tears streaming down my face. They weren't just evidence. They were a slow-motion replay of my stolen youth, of years spent being degraded and abused. But this time, I wasn't crying from pain or shame. I was crying because the truth was finally revealed. That evidence spoke for me, releasing all the suppressed anguish I had carried for so long. Mr. Hayes turned to the judge and jury, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, this was not a marital spat. This was a calculated, premeditated murder plot, born from a despicable motive. The defendant not only physically abused the victim but psychologically tortured her for years. The defense's claim of a momentary lapse in judgment is utterly baseless in the face of this irrefutable evidence." After the audio and photos were presented, the whispers in the courtroom died down. All eyes, from the curious spectators to the stern-faced judge, were on me, the small woman in the wheelchair. The presiding judge adjusted his glasses, his voice resonating through the silent room. "The court invites the victim, Dr. Evelyn Reed, to make a final statement before the jury begins deliberation." I took a deep breath. My chest still ached with a dull pain, but the fear and weakness that had plagued me for years were gone. Marcus and Sarah sat right behind me, their hands gently on my shoulders, lending me their strength. I gripped the arms of the wheelchair and pushed myself up as straight as I could. I wanted to look directly into the eyes of everyone in that room, especially the man trembling at the defendant's table. I began to speak. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, each word drawn from the very bottom of my bleeding heart. "Your Honor, members of the jury, everyone here today, I am a doctor. These hands have held a scalpel and saved thousands of lives, snatching them back from the jaws of death. But the irony is, I couldn't save myself. I couldn't heal the wounds inflicted upon me for years by the man I married." I paused, fighting back a surge of emotion, my gaze sweeping over Richard's bowed head. He didn't dare look at me. His shoulders trembled. Perhaps only now was he beginning to understand the price of his cruelty. My voice grew stronger, firmer. "I am not here today, exposing the ugly scars on my body and in my soul, to ask for anyone's pity. I am here to make one thing clear. Domestic violence is not a private family matter. It is not a husband's right to discipline his wife. The courtroom was utterly silent. I could hear the stifled sobs of a few women in the gallery. I looked directly at the news cameras, wanting to send a message to the thousands of other women suffering as I had. It is a crime. No one, not a husband or a father, has the right to trample on another person's dignity and life in the name of love or family. Silence is not a sacrifice. It is complicity with evil. I almost paid with my life to learn that lesson, and I pray that no one else has to walk down the same painful path. As I finished, I felt as if a massive stone had been lifted from my chest. I looked at Richard one last time. My gaze was surprisingly calm. There was no hatred, no lingering attachment, only pity for a man who had thrown everything away for greed and selfishness. The jury deliberation felt like an eternity. Richard sat slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, radiating the despair of a man who knew his fate was sealed. Helen sat in the gallery, her face ashen, occasionally whimpering her son's name. She looked at me with a mixture of blame and pleading, but I met her gaze with cold silence. Compassion, when misplaced, is a cruelty to oneself. Finally, the bell rang, signaling the jury's return. Everyone in the room rose. The judge, his face solemn, took the verdict and began to read, his voice strong and clear, each word a hammer of justice, exposing the crime and sealing the perpetrator's fate. Based on the evidence presented and the proceedings of this trial, the judge declared, the court finds the defendant, Richard Thompson, guilty. His actions were exceptionally grievous, showing a deliberate and depraved indifference to human life, protected by the law. The defendant acted with premeditated intent and a despicable motive to gain financially, demonstrating a profound disregard for the law and moral decency. My heart pounded. My hands gripped the wheelchair. Therefore, this court finds the defendant, Richard Thompson, guilty of attempted murder and felony domestic assault. The court sentences the defendant to 18 years in state prison. Furthermore, the defendant is ordered to pay full restitution for the victim's medical expenses and emotional distress as determined by law. 18 years. The number struck Richard and his family like a lightning bolt. He staggered, nearly collapsing, held up only by the bailiffs. The color drained from his face, his eyes vacant as if he couldn't process what he had just heard. His life, his career, the status he was so proud of it, all ended here. In the gallery, Helen let out a piercing scream and fainted. The courtroom filled with murmurs, the weeping of the defendant's family mixed with the quiet sighs of relief from supporters of justice. I sat perfectly still. A single hot tear rolled down my cheek. This time, it wasn't a tear of pain or fear. It was a tear of release, of faith that justice, though it may come late, always prevails. The judge's gavel struck the desk one last time, a decisive sound that closed the trial and a dark, tragic chapter of my life. The luxurious, modern house where we had lived, a place filled with fake, glamorous memories and long, tear-soaked nights, was officially foreclosed on by the bank to cover Richard's massive debts. The day I moved out, I didn't take much, just some clothes for my daughter and me, and the few mementos that were truly mine. Looking at the expensive furniture and art, now covered with seizure notices, I felt no regret. Instead, I felt a sense of relief, as if I had escaped a gilded cage. I had lost years of savings, but I walked out with my life, my daughter, and most importantly, my freedom. I took Lily back to my parents' old house, a small, modest home in a quiet, older neighborhood that I hadn't touched in years. The house was dated, the paint peeling, the iron gate creaking with rust. But to me, it felt like the warmest, safest castle in the world. After 2 months of rest, to recover and stabilize our new life, I decided to return to work. That first morning back, I stood before the mirror for a long time, straightening my crisp white coat, pinning my ID badge to my chest. I felt a familiar mix of nervousness and anticipation. I was afraid of the pitying looks, the whispers about the doctor whose husband was in prison, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. Stepping into the hospital lobby, the familiar smell of antiseptic greeted me, but this time it didn't carry the stench of death from that horrific day. It was the smell of life, of the dedication to which I had devoted my youth. I kept my head down, walking quickly, trying to avoid the curious stares, my heart pounding. But contrary to my fears, as I entered the surgical wing, I saw Marcus, Sarah, and all my colleagues waiting for me. They held bouquets of fresh flowers, their faces lit with genuine, radiant smiles. There were no prying eyes, no cheap pity, only the warm welcome of a family. "Welcome home, Evelyn," Sarah exclaimed, running to embrace me, her eyes tearing up. "You've gotten so thin, but seeing you look so bright, we can all finally breathe easy." Marcus came over and handed me a bouquet of brilliant sunflowers, his eyes shining with respect and warmth. "Welcome back, Doctor. Your patients have been asking for you, Chief." I hugged the flowers, their sweet scent making my eyes sting. I looked at the familiar faces around me, the people who had stood by me during my darkest days. A wave of emotion washed over me. I realized my worries had been for nothing. When you have the courage to face the darkness and step into the light, people don't see you with pity. They see you with respect and admiration. That first day back was busy but energizing. I threw myself into surgeries and consultations, my hands steady and precise on the scalpel, as if they had never been through such trauma. Under the bright, shadowless lights of the operating room, I forgot all my sorrow. I was simply a doctor, doing everything in my power to save lives. I spoke with Marcus and the hospital administration about starting a special counseling group within our department, which we called Project Dawn. It wasn't a grand charity or a series of hollow seminars, but a first aid station for legal and psychological support. I wanted it to be a lifeline for women drowning in the flood of abuse, helping them to recognize violence, gather evidence, and most importantly, find their self-worth again. I invited Mr. Hayes and a few psychologists to join. We worked quietly but persistently after our shifts. On the day the project launched, the first person to come to me was a young woman in her early 20s, her arm bandaged from where her husband had accidentally pushed her. She sat hunched in her chair, tears in her eyes, trembling as she asked, "Doctor, I'm so scared. If I call the police, he'll kill me. I have nowhere to go." I took her cold hand, looked into her terrified eyes, and said softly, "Look at me. I was once as scared as you are. I also thought there was no way out. It took me years to learn how to protect myself, but you don't have to wait that long. Silence is not how you keep a family together. It's the fastest way to destroy yourself. You have me, you have the law. You are not alone." The young woman broke down sobbing, but this time they were tears of relief. I showed her how to document her injuries, how to record threats, and connected her with a lawyer to safely plan her divorce. Watching her leave the room with her shoulders a little straighter, I felt a warmth spread through me. I realized my mission wasn't just to save lives on the operating table, but to use the scars of my own life as a shield for other vulnerable women. Project Dawn was new and faced many challenges, but every time I helped someone escape the clutches of violence, my own life felt more meaningful. I didn't want to be a hero. I just wanted to be a sister, a friend holding out a hand when they needed it most, to let them know that after the long, dark night, the sun will rise again. Marcus was always there, a quiet, steady presence. He understood the depth of my trauma, so he never pressured me. He didn't offer empty platitudes or promise me the moon. He just cared for me in small, silent ways. On evenings when I had long shifts, he would pick up Lily from school, take her for ice cream, or buy her a new storybook. One time, I walked out of a late-night surgery, completely exhausted, to find him waiting in the hallway with a container of still warm soup. He smiled gently. "Eat something. Lily's asleep at her grandmother's, so don't worry." His quiet kindness made my scarred heart flutter. I wasn't made of stone. I could see his feelings for me, but the ghost of my past marriage made me hesitant. I was a bird afraid of a bent branch. I was afraid of making another mistake, afraid I didn't have the strength to trust or love again. I was afraid of hurting this good man with the sharp, broken pieces of my soul. One weekend evening, Marcus took Lily and me for a walk in the park. Watching his tall figure holding Lily's hand, hearing her joyous laughter echo in the breeze, my eyes welled up. How long had it been since my daughter had known such simple, complete happiness? How long had it been since I had felt this kind of peace? Marcus turned and looked at me, his eyes warm under the golden lamplight. He slowed his pace to walk beside me. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low and gentle, "I know you need time. I'm not in a rush. I can wait a year, 2 years, however long it takes. I just hope you don't close yourself off completely. Let me share the burden with you, even if it's just as a friend." I looked down at my worn sneakers and whispered, "Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for not abandoning us. But I'm just not ready. I'm afraid I'll only bring you pain." He said nothing, just gently squeezed my trembling hand. It was a grip firm enough to feel safe, but loose enough that I could pull away if I wanted. That absolute respect was the best medicine for my wounded heart. One morning, I received a call from an old neighbor. They told me that Helen, my former mother-in-law, had suffered a massive stroke and was in a county hospital with no one to care for her. Since Richard went to prison, all her relatives had distanced themselves, leaving her to live alone in her large, empty house. Hearing the news, I felt no satisfaction or hatred, only a profound sadness for the strange turns of life. She was just a misguided mother who had taught her son the wrong lessons, and now she was reaping the lonely consequences. I took a half-day off and drove to the county hospital, not as a dutiful daughter-in-law, but as a doctor, and as someone needing to face the past one last time to truly let go. The hospital room smelled strongly of medicine. Helen lay contorted on the bed, her mouth drooping, one side of her body paralyzed. The venomous woman who had screamed curses at me was now just a frail, helpless old woman. When she saw me, her eyes widened in shock, then shifted to shame and fear. She tried to speak, but only garbled sounds came out, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. I walked over, calmly reviewed her chart, and adjusted her IV drip. My movements were professional and detached. "Just rest," I said, my voice gentle but devoid of any warmth. "I've already paid your hospital bill for the week and hired a nurse to look after you. As for me, this is the last time I will be here." Helen stared at me, her one good hand reaching out, trembling, as if begging for forgiveness or grasping for a connection. I took a step back. I no longer hated her, but I couldn't pretend the wounds she helped inflict never existed. The greatest forgiveness I could offer was to not carry hatred in my heart, but that didn't mean I had to carry her burdens. "Take care of yourself. Let the past rest. Lily and I have our own lives now. Please find peace and focus on getting better." I turned and walked away, not looking back at the late, remorseful tears rolling down her cheeks. Stepping out of the hospital, the sky was a brilliant blue. A gentle autumn breeze blew through my hair. I took a deep breath of the fresh air and felt my chest become light. A year later, the wind chimes on the door of my favorite cafe tinkled merrily as I walked in. The rich aroma of roasted coffee and freshly baked pastries created a warm, comforting atmosphere. I chose a table by the window, a place where I could watch the bustling city life go by, yet feel completely separate from its noise. It was a beautiful Sunday, a day just for myself, a quiet moment to reflect on the long road I had traveled. Outside, under a tree with brilliant red leaves, Marcus and Lily were playing with a small puppy. My daughter's bright laughter floated in, as clear as a mountain stream. Marcus patiently bent down to wipe sweat from her brow, his eyes filled with a love as deep as any father's. The scene was as beautiful and simple as a painting, warming my heart more than any fire. We hadn't gotten married, nor were we in any rush to bind ourselves with a piece of paper. We chose to simply be partners, sharing life's joys and sorrows, letting love grow from understanding, not obligation. I took a sip of my hot black coffee. The initial bitterness quickly faded, leaving a sweet aftertaste. Life was like this coffee. You had to taste the bitterness to fully appreciate the sweetness. Peace. I looked at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back was in her 40s, with fine lines of time and experience around her eyes, but those eyes were bright, calm, and confident. She was no longer the submissive wife who bowed her head to abuse, nor the vengeful woman in the courtroom. The me of today knew how to love herself, to cherish what she had, and to let go of what was never hers. I was still Dr. Evelyn Reed, putting on my white coat every day, but with a new perspective. I healed my patients, and in doing so, I healed myself. Richard was still in prison, paying for his sins. I no longer concerned myself with how he was, whether he felt remorse or not. He belonged to the past, a painful but necessary chapter that had forced me to grow. As for me, I was living fully in the present and looking toward the future. Marcus looked up and caught my eye. He smiled and waved. Lily ran to the window, pressing her face against the glass and making a funny face at me. I laughed, a genuine, light-hearted laugh, the happiest I had felt in years. Golden sunlight streamed through the leaves, dancing on my shoulders. I whispered to myself, "Finally, I am living, truly living a life worth living."